Welcome to the Visual Storytelling Podcast. My name is Fred Ranger, and I'm so happy that you're joining us this week for another inspirational conversation. Today I'm quite happy because I have with me a special guest. I'm a big fan of his work, and we just had a small conversation pre-show, and I think this is going to be a good one. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today Dotan Saguy. Dotan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Fred. It's great to be here.
Well, you know what, Dotan? You are a photographer that I truly respect. You're based in Los Angeles, but I want to give a bit of background on your history because I think it's important and it's interesting. You were born in Israel as the son and grandson of Holocaust survivors, and you grew up in a modest Parisian suburb and moved to the U.S. as a young adult. And you've had a career in tech, actually 20-year career, and you recently transitioned to full-time photographer, and you're big on documentary photography and so on and so forth. But there are a couple moments in time that are important for you, and I think you attended the Eddie Adam workshop, the Missouri Photo Workshop, and studied photojournalism in Santa Monica College. So I think all that put together makes it for a very interesting story. And I just want to mention also that Dotan has been published in National Geographic, The Guardian, Los Angeles Times, and so on and so forth, and also worked very closely with Leica. Wow, Dotan, that's a lot. That's a lot of things you've done over the past couple of years. But for the three people who don't know you in the photography world, can you walk us through a bit more on that story of how you discovered photography and you decided to invest so much time, effort, and in doing this for full time?
Yeah, my photography goes back quite a long time, although not, as intensely as right now. But I started photographing about 30 plus years ago as a young adult. And my dad was a photographer, not professional, but just, very, a amateur photographer doing a lot of his own, development and everything. And he had a lab. And so I grew up in that environment and with, him, with his love of photography kind of being, conveyed to me at a young age. And a lot of these years were in the film days, obviously, because I'm not that young. So this was, dating back to the, late 80s, early 90s, and starting, photographing with Nikon cameras, film cameras, obviously at the time. And trying all kinds of different things. I went through so many phases between the portraits and landscapes, and I tried pretty much everything there is to try with a camera, including I had a medium format landscape phase where I was going everywhere with a big tripod and a big camera. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, it's all about storytelling. When I felt like I was maybe strong enough technically to capture moments, because I think especially back when you had film cameras and it wasn't quite as easy. It was intimidating, I think, for somebody starting in photography to just go straight into street photography or documentary, because it's just it's very demanding. So I think initially learning and having all my time to focus like on a nice landscape where I could set up, think, wait for the light. And it was just reassuring to me. And then I think I needed that in my trajectory to eventually get more comfortable with things that are more immediate and require a little more speed and just mastery of the equipment. So eventually, I think maybe around 2010 or so, I transitioned to more street photography type stuff, but still at a kind of amateur, just on vacation or whenever I had free time. And that's when I started, I think the Fuji X line started, coming out with the X Pro
with
1
the X Pro,
and that sort of thing. And it was a little bit more nimble for that sort of thing. So I sold all my Nikon gear. That was like, I had like the big professional or whatever, super fast Nikons, the first digital ones, D2X or whatever it was, with all kinds of lenses. And I just went very simple to just X Pro 1 lens. I wanted to just experiment with that. And then eventually made my way that was my kind of gateway drug to Leica.
I think we're we're the same on that front, and we're not the only ones. I talked to a lot of photographers, and for me, it was a Nikon D. I mean, I started with the D80, then the D700, which I still believe was one of the best cameras of all time.
I had that one. That was my last Nikon.
There
It
you go.
was
That
great.
sensor was so good in low light. Again, for back then.
Yeah.
But then the X Pro again, it changed the game for me, and also I guess a lot of photographers that wanted to have a lighter setup, and the trade-off in terms of image quality was not that bad. And actually, Fuji was offering a new color science approach and so on and so forth. So I think it's the natural path, and now we're both actually shooting with Leica cameras too. But before we talk about the cameras, I think there's something interesting about the fact that you decided to say, you know what, I'm going to spend a little bit more time understanding street photography. So what actually drawn you to street photography in the first place?
I mean, I think it's just the inspiration from all the masters, the Winogrands, the Bruce Davidsons, the Cartier-Bresson, all these people. Just I kind of grew up with those images around me, and I think there was I also there was a span of 5 years where the kids were young enough, and we would just pick up and leave in May for Paris. I was already living in LA, but we decided we wanted to raise the kids bilingual, so we wanted to spend some time in Paris visiting family, and just living in Paris as well as in LA. And so we would pick up and leave around mid-May and spend a couple months in Paris. I would actually put the kids in school first day we got there, which was kind of cruel because it was the end of the school year, and they were already in LA. It was like they weren't doing very much, and then we'd put them in school in France, and they'd have to like readapt and make friends and like understand what was going on. So anyway, so we did this for a few years, and so I got like a couple of months each one of those years, just walking around Paris. And I think that's what kind of drew me into street photography, because just Paris is just a natural place to do street photography, and a lot of kind of the birthplace of street photography in a lot of ways. If you think of the Cartier-Bressons and so on. So I think that's what got me, the bug, into that phase of street photography that I never left.
I can definitely relate. The first time I went to Paris and I had my camera with me, I was actually not nervous, but I was like, oh my God, there's everywhere you look, the backdrop is just super interesting and beautiful. Or sometimes it's, a scene that's more harsh because there's some, neighborhoods that are very, very different. And this is all walking distance. You need to walk Paris, I think, to understand, the vibe and get the local, feel of it. And by the way, your work in Paris is very, very impressive. I think I've seen a couple shots. I know you're more towards the US lately, but you have to dig into Dotan's catalog, because he's got some pretty incredible images everywhere in the world. Speaking of which, do you have one destination that you haven't been, but that you want to be there with your camera and start documenting?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple, I would say, but I mean, there's so many. I haven't set foot in, I've set foot in Africa, but not in the Central Africa, or there's a lot of places, and I haven't done very much in South America. And I mean, there's so many places I have to explore better. But I would say Japan is probably the one that is really interesting to me right now. That I could definitely imagine spending some time there, and I actually had a friend who just came back and said, you have to go do street photography there. It's just incredible. So that would be probably my number one on my bucket list, for next destinations.
Well, let's look at that, because Anthony Bourdain said, and the guy traveled a lot, right? So he even went into, to your point, Africa, and eating with like tribes and stuff. And he said, one of the places I've been the most destabilized was Japan. So I think it's a whole experience. And I've got actually friends to your point that are there, and they're, when you live there, it's a bit different. But for us who are from Canada, the US, or in North America, when you go there, you're like, oh my God, this is so different than everything I've seen. But also the the look and feel of the city itself.
Hmm.
I think I would go there with a wide angle, but sometimes you want to create that bouquet. I don't know. What's speaking of which, what is your current setup? Because you are a ambassador and you do like a workshops and so on and so forth. But is there a preferred kit when you travel? Speaking of traveling.
Yeah, I memean, it's really simple and kind of disappointing when I tell people who are into gear. It's like I'm really not. I'm a gadget person, and but when it comes to cameras, I'm very minimalist. So my setup is really just a Leica monochrome, and right now I'm using still the M10 monochrome. I know the M11 monochrome just came out, so I'm considering whether I should make the move or not. And a 35 millimeter.
Yep.
Semilux. That's all I use. I only use that one lens. I do have a couple other Leica lenses that are vintage lenses that I've used for a project that are kind of very specifically for the project that I needed them for. But which was not street photography. But when I do street photography or documentary, it's just that one lens, that 135 on my Leica monochrome.
That's very simple. I like it. You don't ask yourself, what do I put in my bag and this and that.
That's it. Yeah.
I love that approach. Speaking of projects, I've been actually, this is how I discovered you, to be honest, with that Nowhere to Go But Everywhere project. And there's such a human touch to it, humanity, I would say, touch to that project. Can you walk us through a bit on how you imagined this project and how it came to life? And then it got published. So this is where I guess a lot of people discovered your work also.
Yeah, so that was my second book. The first one being Venice Beach, and that came out in 2018. So the second one, which was kind of tied into that first Venice project, is this Nowhere to Go But Everywhere, and that got published by the same publisher, Kara Verlag, in 2020. So actually at the beginning of the pandemic, like it was just the
Right on
worst
time.
timing ever. It came out in May 2020.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah. So I had shows canceled, everything canceled. That book just kind of fell out of the sky, and nobody was there to receive it. I mean, it was people found it online and
Yeah.
so on, and I guess that was a time where people were consuming a lot of photo books. So in that way, it was a good timing. But anyway, so the way the project came about was. When I was shooting the Venice Beach book, which is still available, by the way, we did a second edition, and there's a little bit left of that second edition. There was one picture in that book that I really love, and I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's definitely among my top 5. It's a scene in a van, and it's called Hippie Van, and there's basically a bunch of hippies that are smoking a joint and just talking to their dog, and there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in this one scene inside that van. And that picture kind of drew me into the question of like, I knew there were a lot of people living in vehicles in Venice, and I wanted to know more about them. Like, this was the first time I was kind of piercing the veil and looking into one of those vans and being invited into those situations to be the fly on the wall. And I was just fascinated by it. And I was just, it was a question for myself, like, what are all those people? Who are they? Why? I know some choose to live in vans, some don't have a choice. And like, what is the span of, what is the diversity of people who are, who have that lifestyle, and what does it look like? Because there's a lot of stigma, and a lot of people think that's drug addicts and alcoholics, and they're dangerous and this and that. And so I wanted to like just find out for myself what was going on in all those vehicles. And so that was the project that I set myself to do after the Venice book. Was, let's go and meet some of these people and see if there's a visual story to tell there. And I started basically just walking around and talking to people living in those vehicles, whoever was willing to talk to me, and made friends with some of them, and started photographing some of them that were okay with me photographing them. And in the I might have like bumped into 5-7 different situations where I was starting to shoot and everything. And one day this bus showed up, this school bus, And one of the people that I was already friends with said, "Hey, those people just parked behind me. I just met them. They seem like great people. You might want to connect with them. They seem really interesting. They live in a school bus. It's a family of 5. There's 3 kids, including it was at the time a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So like young children
Yeah.
living in this little school bus, and the parents are from Brazil and they're Mormons. And there's all those layers to the
Wow.
story. I was like, I have to meet these people. So I went to meet them. They were super welcoming, very interested in the photography, and they let me shoot. Like the first, as soon as I met them, they're like, go ahead, just, be that fly on the wall. We don't mind. Just share the pictures with us. And I started photographing them more and more. And the more I photographed them, the more I realized they were the more interesting visual story of every. Like my original project idea was to show the diversity of, so I was going to shoot a lot of different situations, but their story was so multi-layered and interesting and visually appealing and everything that I spoke with my publisher, and they were like, we think you could just make a book about them, because if you start putting them in a book with other people, that story will be so diluted. It's it's kind of a waste. Like it's a really interesting story that has a lot of visual layers, but also just interesting human aspects to just questions that come up about human condition and so on, that are education and all kinds of things, raising your kids in this environment, and the stigma that you get from the outside, and like all that stuff was in it. So I just decided to make the book about them, and so the project sort of morphed. It's interesting when you start those projects, you don't know where it's going to end up sometimes, and this is a case where the project kind of got totally on a totally different track, but it was for the best, and it worked. I mean, I still keep in touch with them. This is it was one of those situations where you spend a lot of time with people, and you gain a lot more than just the photography. It was just a great experience, just for me, and they're great friends.
Well, that's very inspiring, and those images again. I'm looking at one where the mother is breastfeeding in the background. You've got the little one on the counter, and it's pretty much it's a mess in there. For that day, that specific day, and one is like studying or looking at a drawing or something.
Yes.
Yeah, it's seriously, it's well, first of all, it's one of my favorite image among the project, but also it shows that you can tell a story without having anything planned or anything scripted and so on and so forth. When you start documenting life, there's hundreds, thousands, millions of stories unfolding at this very moment that you could be documenting. So again, it doesn't have to be super complicated. To your point, you have to be opportunistic. You have to understand the opportunity in front of you. You have to be able to pivot. I guess your years in startups, you've been able to pivot very rapidly and say, okay, it's not that, it's that. Let's go with that. Let's go with the flow.
That's right.
So
I call that the photo that you're referring to is also one of my favorites from the book, and it's called War Zone.
It looks like a war
because
zone.
that's what the bus looks like, a war zone in that photo. Just things everywhere, and that's how it looked like most of the time. Like I'd step into the bus, and this is exactly. There was nothing staged in the whole project. There's nothing posed. There's I think maybe one photo where we wanted to take a family photo where they posed for me, but
Of course.
The rest of the book is all just in the moment, and just life as it happened in that bus. So it was, and you're right. There's project ideas are everywhere. It's not so much about the idea. I think it's just you have to get out there, and you might start with an idea. Like I know some of my students and some people I know, who want to do projects, agonize over what the project will be and what the idea should be, and then they never start it because they're always sort of agonizing about like planning it. And I think at some point you just want to jump in, even if it seems like an unfinished idea and it's not totally holding up and doesn't make total sense, and just start doing, and then and it will probably evolve, but you'll end up finding an interesting story. I think the danger is more not to start, And
Yeah.
because if you don't start, you're never going to find that story.
I think it's that rule where that I really like. 80% and ship or 100% and never ship. I
Right.
think you have to be able to live with the 20% of wiggle room or uncertainty when you start a project. And to your point, the hardest part is to start. So once you
That's
start,
right.
you get in the groove of things and so on and so forth, and you embrace change. That's how I guess project comes to life. And a lot of people are looking up to you, Dotan, and they're like, okay, but Dotan is a known photographer and he has access to publishers. But I want to remind everybody on this podcast and the listeners that Dotan started with 0 followers, 0 connection, like everybody else, and he had to work for it. So can you talk to me about the work ethic? Because I think you and Phil Penman and Matt Stewart and all these guys, you guys have such a high work ethic. You guys are putting in the work, but that's not something that people necessarily see all the time. They only see the end result, which are the great images that you guys produce, but they don't see the 10,000 hours you put in. So can you talk a bit more about the work aspect of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just about it's just what we were saying about the project. You just have to go out and shoot. And sometimes you don't know what the project will be, and you find the project as you're shooting things that interest you. I think at the end of the day, a project has to be, I mean, I have kind of 3 criteria for that have worked for me. That I've actually taken those 3 criteria from a business book that was about finding the right business. So
Aha.
I'm definitely using that background, but I think it works very well for photography as well, for photography projects. For me, a project, I can only go out and do it a lot if I love it. Like if I'm really passionate about the project, it has to be. There were projects that I was kind of forcing myself to do because I thought they were interesting and important, but I wasn't enjoying shooting them, and those projects never got finished because I just didn't want to go, like I didn't feel like going out there all the time and shooting them. So it has to be something I love. I've discovered I can't do a good project that people will enjoy looking at unless I'm really enjoying myself shooting it. Uh, and the second thing is, it typically takes some kind of advantage. Like in the case of Venice, Venice Beach is kind of in my backyard. It's just a few miles away. I can easily get there. I already know people there. I know the place really well, so I have a little bit of a. I've developed a little bit of an advantage, versus some other photographers who might just kind of drop in for a week and not really know the place or not have access to it all the time. So I think sometimes a project takes executing a project well takes like having some sort of an advantage. Either you speak a language that other people don't speak and gives you access to a certain culture, or you can travel to a place frequently for work that other people can't easily travel to, and so you have access to a country more than other people would, like some kind of personal advantage that you have doing that project. And the third thing is, I think it's good to pick something that other people are interested in,
Yeah.
because you want people to look at your work, and unless the subject matter is interesting to people, your work just won't be seen. So I think those 3 things. But the first thing though is the love of the topic, and wanting to be out there. I know I've answered your question in a roundabout way, but I guess what got me started and got me to have, I guess, my first successes and everything, I think was because I was just out there shooting a lot, and trying to learn from other photographers, and just working the craft a lot, while on things that I was just loving photographing. Like
Yeah.
Venice is like which I still go to Venice. My latest project, which is going to be a book soon, is also shot there, and I just can't help but going there. It's, if I have time, typically on a weekend, because that's when it really comes alive. I'm there. And if I don't take a single photo that entire afternoon that I'm trying to take photos there because I don't find anything interesting, I still have a good time. I come back with a smile on my face, even though I have nothing on my SD card. But I think it takes that sort of passion of a place or a project to just go out all the time. I'll tell you
Yeah,
my pet peeve, just to finish on that
yeah, yeah,
question,
yeah.
is sometimes I run workshops. I teach workshops, and the thing that I try to really get people to shoot on a regular basis. There are, a lot of photographers that I'm sure they want to shoot more, but they often just shoot on workshops. They go to a workshop, they'll shoot, for all day long for 4 days, 5 days, and they'll put the camera away. And even though they do have time from time to time, and people are busy, so I understand that, but they won't pull the camera out till the next workshop or till the next vacation. And I think you can't. It's really hard to get better that way. I think you get better. It's just very slowly. I think if you just go out at least once a week, just it's a muscle. If you work that muscle at least once a week, the and you have so some sort of a project to focus on, the progress that I've seen people do in those cases is just way faster than if you're just shooting on workshops.
Did you ever get someone coming back to you say, I went to your workshop. I'm not improving. I want a refund. No, I'm just kidding.
No, they learn a lot, but even everything I can teach them in the workshop, I mean, I can see them making progress from the first day
Yeah,
to
yeah,
the last day. The problem is, like I said, it's a muscle. So unless they exercise the muscle, they're going to forget half the things I taught
of
them,
course.
and it's not really going to sink in. And then by the next 6 months later, when they do the next workshop, they might have a little bit left from that, but it's not gonna make that huge a difference in their photography.
Yeah, to your point, photography is just like anything else. You got to put in your 10,000 hours if you want to develop. And even then, you should. I'm looking at guys like Joel Morris. I'm sure he's learning stuff every day, shooting still to this date on the street of New York.
Yes, yes.
I want to talk about Venice because you just mentioned it. It's in your backyard, but you made an interesting choice in terms of going about it black and white because it's so colorful. And we mentioned pre-show. And by the way, you describe the tourist who goes once a year and doesn't have a lot of time, and that's me. That's me. And of course, the photos are becoming a bit more cliche because you're attracted to the stuff that stands out on their own. But you went deep into Venice and some incredible images there. But I want to talk about your use of black and white. Why did you decide to go black and white, and especially for that project when it's so colorful out there?
Well, yeah. So when I started shooting the Venice project, that was around 2015, and I was using. This is when I switched to the Leica monochrome, and the first monochrome that came out, and I felt like it was a really good match for Venice because Venice has sort of a timeless element to it that you don't necessarily see with your eyes because of all the colors, but when you start seeing it in black and white, you can, if you shoot, some of the characters and the in the skate park and the bodybuilders and like the surfers and like
Yeah,
that whole crowd in black and white, they look very timeless. You don't know if the pictures were taken in the 70s, in the 80s, 90s, 60s. It's really hard to tell. And I when I started seeing what came out and how it made it look timeless, I really liked that aspect of it because I got to Venice, kind of late, compared to that era of the 1970s, the what they used to call it Dogtown, and it was this rough place, and it kept a lot of that character, but it's much more noticeable when you see it in black and white. So I that's why it's the timelessness really that kind of caused me to use black and white and stick with it.
and would you say that now you're 99% drawn into producing work in black and white, or do you go to color sometimes?
I really don't these days. I don't go to color at all. I did some work in Cuba a few years ago. I went for a couple of different trips where that were all about doing a project there. So it wasn't like a vacation or anything. They were actually like planned kind of documentary trips. And there, I just couldn't get myself to shoot black and white. I know some people have shot it in Cuba in black and white, and there's some great images made in black and white. I just at the time I had both. I was lucky to have both a Leica color camera and the monochrome, and I brought both. And the day I arrived, I was like, I put the monochrome in, in the drawer, and I basically was going out only with my color camera.
Yeah.
But so that's the one time probably in my short career so far that I just felt like just black and white wasn't cutting it for me. But everything else, my default is black and white.
Yeah, and by the way, the way you edit, do you edit a lot the files? Like, do you have kind of some people have rules or whatever, but like, do you like to spend a lot of time on an image, or the shortest amount of time possible?
So so first, it might be confusing because I use the word editing for something different. So to me, I use the
Yes.
photojournalist lingo. So editing for me is picking the right pictures. So it's like pictures, selecting the pictures is editing. Processing is where I process the picture and kind of tone it and so on, crop it, whatever I need to do to the picture is in processing. So I do spend some time in processing. I don't spend a lot of time, but I have I usually use for my street work. I use Silver Effects quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so it's from Lightroom. It's a plugin. I go into Silver Effects and I have my own sort of recipes in Silver Effects that I use, and because I really like the high contrast, but preserving a lot of the tonal range, and I like just punchy blacks and that sort of aesthetic. So I find that processing that software really helps me get that visual look. And so but it's pretty simple at the end of the day. And I think I have a couple of I've made a couple of tutorials for Silver Effects that are on YouTube somewhere.
Okay.
And also on Mark Silber, who's another YouTuber, also had me do like some demo about. So if people want to see how I process my images in black and white, it's somewhere on YouTube.
Well, I will find it and put it in the show notes so people can enjoy that process.
If they're interested in seeing like what the sausage making.
But I'm interested. Definitely. Yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, but I definitely interested in learning more on that front. But also that Arrested Dream project, which is, I guess, very different in terms of what the normal work you produce. How did you get to those type of results creatively? Was it through processing or through literally putting two images together? How did you get there?
So they're single images. I know they look like double exposures, and that's the first reaction I get from people who look at them the first time. Just for people who are listening who have no idea what we're talking about here. This is a project that is not street photography. I guess you'd call it like a fine art project or something. It's more abstract.
Yeah.
Abstract landscape, you could call it, maybe. I don't know. Essentially what it was is I've been spending a lot of time in the past couple of years in the mountains of California near Yosemite. And I got a place there, and I've just been spending more time, kind of splitting my time between LA and there. I just love the outdoors there and so on. The problem I found there in terms of photography is there's not much street photography to be doing. There might be some documentary, and I have some ideas about what documentary I could do out there, but it's not like an urban environment like Venice. So I was completely like a fish out of water with my Leica, just trying to figure out what to do. One day I went into this historic state park called Bodie, which is a ghost town. It's probably the most famous, or one of the most famous Western ghost towns in the U.S. And it was from the gold mining era, the 1800s and so on. And it's a big ghost town. There's a lot of buildings left and so on. And it's been preserved in a very like realistic way. Like it wasn't made into a Disneyland kind of thing where they redid everything, but they preserved the original structures really well. And it's also a place that there's no termites. It's like it's very dry, so wood, I guess lasts a long time. So even though they're all like wood barracks, they've been pretty, they've stayed pretty much intact, a lot of them. So I walked into that ghost town one day with my dog, just walking my dog, and with no intention. I knew it had been shot a million times. It wasn't the kind of photography I know, I typically do. So I was like, I'm just going to play tourist. And as soon as I started walking through the park and discovering the ghost town, first of all, there was this vibe. I don't know, it's probably all in my head about, spirits and ghosts and
Like
everything. It just
creepy a
felt
bit, yeah.
very spiritual, and like I was like stepping into this spiritual experience. And the other feeling I had was I started looking through the windows, because a lot of the windows are still, like, the glass is still on the windows, and discovering that there was this overlapping of the reflection of the background behind, like the mountains and this clouds, and what you could basically see on the horizon, and mixed in with the interiors, which were also preserved. Where you have, inside the homes, you have like tables and plates on the tables, and a couch here, and a uh, chair, rocking chair there, and so on. So you could, if you looked at a certain angle in certain lighting situations, which were kind of hard to find, you could superimpose the two in the same picture with a single exposure,
Wow.
with no double exposure. You're just basically trying to find the right angle and putting the camera all the way up to the window, and then you'd have sort of a double exposure look of the interior mixed with the background of the landscape. So it became a game. I kept going back and trying to find those, sort of like gold mining. It reminded me of, which, it was fitting because it's a gold mining town. I was like mining those pictures where that rare situation of overlapping background and interiors, was visually compelling and helped the story. There too, there was storytelling in terms of what it was like to live at the time, the passage of time, and all these things being in dust, and then the landscapes in the background that were very dramatic, and the light that's very dramatic. Anyway, so I kept coming back and finding more and more of them until I had a whole collection of, different things that were kind of telling the story of the what life was like at the time, but through this very double exposure look.
Well,
And there, to go back to your original question about processing, silver effects, I think, and that whole, like, really boosting the contrast and everything, made those pictures a lot more interesting. Because a lot of them, if I showed you the raw files, it's kind of hard to know what you're looking at. But by really bringing out the shadows and really digging into all the, the tonal range, that I was able to extract in those digital files, then the image sort of came to life in the processing. So I'd say processing was even more important
yeah.
there for that project than it was for my regular street photography, because I
Well,
really was pushing the file to its limits. And this is also where the having the monochrome to play with was incredible, because you can't extract as much juice out of, like, a color picture converted to black and white. Like, it just doesn't have that same tonal range, and you can't dig into the blacks as much, and so on. So that's where I really felt like it was tangible, that the file was giving me all this, ability to play with things, that I wouldn't have had on another sensor.
well, for sure, it made for some very interesting perspective on this location, and I'm sure not a lot of people thought about photographing that location this way, because people will be drawn into the signs or specific building and so on and so forth. So you've been able to really create something unique. Have you been chasing those type of reflection outside of this location too? Did you get hooked, or you're like, what, I'm done, this is the project, now let's go back to regular programming?
It came to my mind, it definitely is something. Now I'm more attuned to it. So if I'm, in Paris or wherever there's like a lot of, Venice doesn't really lend itself well to this, because there's not a lot of windows and glass, and, or if they are, like, what's behind them is not that interesting. So, but whenever I'm traveling, or I'm now seeing those reflections a lot more vividly, and I can sort of imagine what they would be like as a, double exposure type, look. So I'm drawn to them more, for sure. Whether there'll be a project expanding outside of just that ghost town based on that. I'm not sure, but I don't know if I get to Japan, from what we were talking
There will
about
be a lot of
before, and I
windows
see,
there, that's for sure.
yeah, I mean, this could be a way to photograph like Tokyo or something, where you just take that as a theme and make everything through windows like this with reflections. It could be cool.
And you would still go black and white in Japan?
I don't know. I'd have to.
Aha.
It's like I'll know it when I see it, kind of thing. Like it's very visceral. Like I can't.
Yeah.
And some projects, by the way, like you mentioned the Nowhere to Go to But Everywhere with the people living in the school bus. I started shooting that project in color originally because the vans and the situations were so colorful, and inside and where people were dressed, and I just felt like it had to be color. And then for several reasons, I realized after a while that black and white was probably the better way to go. So a lot, maybe half the pictures were shot in color and converted, and the other half was shot in native black and white once I started basically deciding this was going to be black and white. But it took me, this is the only project that took me a while before I realized it had to be black and white.
Well, I think the decision was the right one because it removes any artifact. Like it's really down to the human and
Yes.
and the way they're living into that bus. So kudos for that choice. Where do you go for inspiration? Because sometimes we look at people, especially people who publish book themselves. Are you a big book type guy, or do you go more online or magazines or movies even? Where do you get your inspiration after all those years?
I'm definitely a photo book guy, so I have a big collection of photo books. And I actually, one of my projects, I don't know when I will get to it. I'm hopefully soon, but I want to help people discover more photo books. So one of the things I want to do, which has nothing to do with actually photographing, it's more just teaching, I guess, photo books or sharing the joy and the wisdom of photo books with others. I'd like to do some videos about photo books and going in depth into some very famous photo books, and in the spirit of like, what can we learn from this? And because there's a way I think that you can look at photo books just flipping the pages, flipping through the book and enjoying the images, which is very valid. It's that's what most people do with photo books. It's and getting inspired by the photos, just sort of by admiring the photography inside the book, just as you would read a normal book. But there's another way of kind of deconstructing what you're looking at and being more in a sort of reverse engineering mode, where you're trying to figure out how were the photos likely to have been taken. What was the photographer looking for? Why did they choose those photos in the book as opposed to others? Like why did those photos make the cut versus others? Why are they sequenced the way they're sequenced? Why did this photo lead to that photo, Like, why not in a different order? Like, if you start asking yourself a lot of questions about what's in the book, I think you can extract a lot of learning, more so than just by looking at the images and being inspired by them. So this is, I guess, one of the things I'd love to share with people, is that way of looking at a photo book that's more investigative, I guess.
So I'm sensing a comeback on YouTube, Dotan. Is that something we can?
You're sensing right. I think this might be this might be the yeah. I guess I tried a series on a little while ago that was kind of based on secrets behind
The secret
famous
behind it.
photographs.
Yeah, I saw that.
And people really liked it, and I really enjoyed making the videos. The problem was there's not that many photographs that I can point to a secret, like that I know something others don't, or I can figure something out that others don't. And each one of those just required so much research. Like I would research for a month before I could put together a video, and then it'd be the editing and all that stuff. And it was just way too not repeatable enough and way too labor intensive. But the photo books thing, I have a whole collection of photo books. I can easily pick, 100 that I would want to dive into and dissect with people. And I think there's just so much to learn from them that I'd be really, it'd be very exciting for me to share it. Also, I think it's an opportunity for me to dive deeper into those photo books. it's always when you're teaching
Yep.
something, I think you're learning at least as much as what you're teaching. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
I think, and you and I are also, business people on top of being photographers. So we like those business books sometimes. But I think it's Simon Sinek who said, "Start with why," and he wrote a whole book about it. And I think this is probably the best question you can ask, in this world we live in, because when you start asking why, you're starting to get deeper and to understand, and you're extracting insights and value versus just
Right.
information or visual information. And I guess to go back to visual storytelling, a good visual story, I don't know if you're like me, but it's something that makes me feel something. It's not just pretty, it's not just good colors or composition or sharpness or whatever. It makes me
Right.
feel something. So in order to
Right.
be able to do that, you need to be able to process in your head, why am I taking this image? What do I want to say? How do I want to say it?
Right.
That's a little bit harder than just a nice landscape. Nothing against landscape. I know there's pretty good landscape photographers out there, but just saying, if you want to use your camera as a creative tool to tell a story, there's a lot that goes into it. So a series like that, Dotan, I would be the first one to listen to it. So you can count on me for one view, maybe more
All
if I
right.
want to go back to it. But
Yeah.
let us know when you launch that.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping. I mean, I've already picked the first book, which is I had to start with The Americans by Robert Frank,
Of
because that's
course.
like the most famous photo book of all times, and in a lot of ways, it kind of opened the way to a lot of other photo books. And documentary and street photo photography kind of exploded from there. So that's the one I'm looking at. The problem is, I was like going into something very simple and straightforward, and like I had sort of a plan, and then I discovered a book that is about the Americans. I think it's called Looking In. I don't know
Okay.
if you've ever seen it.
So,
It's
so
this massive book that was made about that whole making of the Americans, and it goes into Robert Frank's life before the Americans, and then how he got the grant to make the Americans, and then how he shot it, and there's lots of photos that didn't make it to the book, and I kind of fell into a rabbit hole, and now I'm just like, it just threw out the window the simplicity of what I was going to do with that book, and I have to find out everything. I'm kind of that way where I'm, I kind of got sucked in
yeah.
to just understanding the whole story. And anyway, so once I'm out of the rabbit hole of that, looking in. But if people can find it, it's actually out of print now. But I found like a decent priced copy. It's phenomenal insight into the making of the most famous photography project of all time,
Mm.
which you don't often get to hear the inside story of how a project like this was made, especially one that gathered so much attention over the years. But this is like they go into minute detail about every single aspect of how that project got made, which is incredible. So anyway, I highly recommend if
I will
people are
try
interested.
to find it online. And speaking of books, Datan, we're approaching the end of the podcast, but I really want to talk about what's next for you, because we've discussed about a few things. I don't know what you want to reveal or what you don't want to reveal, but I know there's some exciting stuff that is coming up and new work from you. So what we can expect over the next few months and years?
Yeah, so I mean, I just set in motion something that I've been kind of waiting to do for a while, which is a book about the dogs of Venice Beach. I know
Nice.
it's kind of like the part two of my Venice Beach book from 2018. It's I love dogs. I have a dog. I volunteer with my dog in the hospital. He's a therapy dog, and he's one of my best friends. He's my best furry friend, and he's dogs are amazing for a whole lot of reasons. Some people who are listening will know exactly what I'm talking about. But in Venice, there's a whole thing with dogs, very quirky situations with dogs on skateboards and just all kinds of interesting dog situations. So I did street photography of dogs pretty much since I started shooting the Venice book. Whenever I see a dog situation, it draws me in. And so I've been photographing dogs for more than 5 years, 8 years now in Venice. So this will be kind of the culmination of of that. I have a lot of pictures to edit from, and so I'm going to be working on making that book. So I just got the go ahead from the publisher. They're willing to do it. They're excited about it, and I have a whole vision for what, how I can draw on the Dogtown, history of Venice. It used to be called Dogtown, not because of dogs, but because it was kind of a rough place with, skateboarders and bodybuilders and all that stuff. Then there's a whole iconography of Dogtown with like the Dogtown cross and there's a whole bunch of sort of tattoos and things that came up over the years. So I want to use all that in making sort of a pun on Dogtown. And anyway, so that's a book project I'm going to be working on for the next 6 months or so. Probably will come out in Europe in May of 2024, and then the summer of 2024 in the US. If we're able to stick to the calendar. If not, it will be pushed back, but that's what I would expect. So I'm going to be posting about this, and
Good.
I just literally got that go ahead from the publisher yesterday.
So scoop on the visual storytelling podcast from Dotan.
Yeah. No, I'm very excited about storytelling with dogs. Is just
you're just adding. And by the way, I'm a big dog lover too. I have a dog also. I have a question. That skater dog, I'll call it the skater dog.
Yes.
Did you know that he had his tongue out when you took the shot, or you'd look at the back and you're like, I guess my picture just got upgraded. He has his tongue out while he's skating, and you managed to get that. And I know it's not about sharpness and stuff. You even have the other dog who's looking at the skater dog. It's, oh my God, this is one of my favorite images of all time. Did you know it was such a great shot when you took it?
I did. So the situation was there's this bulldog that is skateboarding on the Venice boardwalk, and
just a regular Tuesday on the boardwalk. A dog is skating.
So, the owner was there, and she was, kind of, putting the skateboard in a certain direction. The dog would step on it and start like skating on his own,
Nice.
with his paw to gain speed, and then like the only thing he couldn't do was turn. So you would like just go straight. And then he would, run into something, and then she'd reorient the skateboard, and he'd just keep going. And so when I saw this, I was actually, I think, with a student, and I think I was teaching a private workshop that day, and I saw this, and we started like focusing just on that. And when the only way, the way I decided I was going to get pictures of this was I needed to be on level with the dog, so I needed to get my camera really low because I wanted to like be at the same level as the bulldog. But the bulldog was going fast, so I was basically like crouching down, running backwards, trying to
with a rangefinder camera that doesn't have a flip up screen.
No screen. I mean, the screen wouldn't have helped. I was aiming in the dog's direction, and I'm using a 35 millimeter, so it's a wide angle, so it's a little, if you don't have to be exactly precise. And I've learned to sort of shoot without looking through the viewfinder that way, so I can have my camera really low. But it was not just shooting from like kind of lower level. It was doing that while running backwards and keeping the camera low, trying to keep up with the dog.
Wow.
And obviously I don't have autofocus, so I also had to keep like a certain distance with the dog. So anyway, it was difficult to do, and I wasn't sure what I was going to get. I did see that there was this big Great Dane, that was going to be in the background, and I thought it'd be cool to have him. I didn't know the Great Dane was going to look back, but I thought it'd be great to have him in the background. So I was aiming to like trying to have it in the background. Meanwhile, I'm not looking through the viewfinder. I'm just clicking clicking the shutter, trying to find moments while I'm like aiming the camera as well as I can while I'm running backwards, all that stuff. So, I mean, in that case, I got lucky that the Great Dane was looked back just as I pressed the shutter, and the bulldog was sticking his tongue out, which bulldogs often do.
I know, but like just the everything together makes this very, very
it's
interesting.
A funny,
and,
it's a very funny moment. It might end up being the cover of the book. I'm not, these things depend on the publisher a lot, but
Well, we don't want to influence the publisher, but I violently agree with that decision. If you hear us, you should do it. Man, that's such a great project. So that's the what's next for you. If people want to know more about either the workshop or the books that you're talking about, where should they go?
So on my website, so I have a workshop. I don't think we talked about it, the two of us, before the show, but
Yep.
it's going to be. I'm doing, this is my first post-COVID workshop in person. It will be in Santa Barbara for the Santa Barbara Summer Solstice Festival. We're going to be documenting. The students are going to be documenting the festivals, including backstage access to the preparation to the festival, and then the parade itself, and so on. And what's really special about this workshop is I'm going to be teaching the photography aspect of it, the actual like photography of like documenting what's happening. But I'm doing it in collaboration with Gail Fisher, who's an amazing photographer and editor. She edited both my books, so we've worked together a lot, and I trust her for editing more than anybody else. She'll be there teaching people how to edit. So again, selecting the best photos is what I call editing, and sequencing the photos to tell a story. So that's really, she's done this for the LA Times. She was working for the Los Angeles Times for most of her career. She edited lots of books with National Geographic. So she's an incredible resource, and so we'll be teaching this workshop together, which is going to be really about storytelling and choosing that Solstice Festival as like the story that people will be documenting. This will be June 21st through 25th. Coming up, 2023. It will be 5 days, and it will be in Santa Barbara, California. So if people want to get more information about this, they can go to my website, which is dotansaguy.com. And you can see my name probably on the podcast. You'll have my name on there. I know.
And the link.
Yes. And then if you go to the workshops tab on my website and you go to in-person workshops, that's the workshop that's currently listed there. So pretty easy to find. It's going to be an incredible. I think we already have most of the people signed up, so we only have a few spots left. So if you want to do a serious workshop about storytelling, it's an incredible opportunity.
Well, I think now I want to be part of that workshop too, so there might be one spot left.
Yeah, I would hurry up if people want to sign up for this, because it's filling up very quickly.
It's very nice, very nice. So, Dotan, I want to thank you personally for taking the time today out of your busy schedule, and you've been very generous, and we've talked about a lot of aspects of visual storytelling. We talked about, the great work you've done, but also some tips for people who want to embrace photography in their life. And Dotan is the proof that, you can transition from one career to another one. And if photography is your thing, you should just start. That's what I'm getting out of this conversation. So Dotan, I wish you a very pleasant reminder of your week, and we'll keep in touch. I will put all the links that we discussed down below. And if you want to give this podcast a 5-star review and share it with your friend, I'm sure you have one friend out there that would benefit from hearing this conversation we just had between Dotan and myself. And if you want to reach out to me or Dotan for that matter, you can send me an email or do a comment on the podcast, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Until then, Dotan, thank you again so much for joining me today.
You're so welcome. It was a pleasure being on your show.
Cheers.
Take care.